This is the Tree of Life, Season 6, Chapter 4. Now, in 37 families, we talked about how there exists two forms of subjectivity. There is subjectivity mediated by, or contained, within an archetypal structure, that is archetypal consensuality, which is self-conscious. That is, created by a downward, top-down, symbolic representation represented by the telescopic effect. Second, there is a subjectivity created within spatial non-consensuality, which is not self-conscious, or rather, is concealed. Now, spatial non-consensuality can be generated from an archetypal consensual line, but that was not its only genesis. It was highlighted in past episodes how there are also spatial non-consensual lineal lines as well, from which these individuals can generate. By consequence of this, it is not completely accurate to say that subjectivity is preceded by symbolism, though in most cases and situations this is indeed true. More precisely, a spatial non-consensual actor, who was not generated by an archetypal consensual line, is unique in this regard, possessing impulses which are not self-conscious, which produce the same arrangements of other social actors without the corresponding verbalizations. What this means in practice is that the other will form into a particular arrangement in response to a concealed impulse the same way they would a self-conscious one, without the associated verbalizations or rationalizations. Now, it may indeed be true that a spatial non-consensual actor is in and of itself just an individual I. It may also be true that such individuals can never form structures except built upon negation. But it is clear that such individuals exist, regardless of whether they are foundational to a society built on communalism. Which begs the question raised in the last podcast. Why can't structures be built upon pure negation, that is concealment rather than self-consciousness? And indeed, as we have demonstrated in the last episode, they can. If one condition is satisfied. Namely, if their observations are broader than the experiences of the conjoined consensuality. Which is to say, that they must by necessity explain the experiences of the conjoined consensuality, but once they do that, all other, subjective, experiences, that is, within the domain of spatial non-consensuality, are fair game. This means that structures can indeed be built upon negation, stemming from a non-self-conscious subjectivity, so long as that subjectivity permits the exploration and categorization of the experiences of the conjoined consensuality. Now, it is also clear in 37 families that concealed impulses cause a loss of synchronicity and synchronization within the conjoined consensuality. This makes sense, since due to their negating properties, concealed impulses generated by a spatial non-consensual actor would cause disassociation both between the internal and external worlds, and between people themselves. Thus, it is also clear that concealed impulses, or negation, cannot be the sole foundation for a cohesive system which unifies all people, but rather may permit the formation of individuals into groups, defined without reference to in-group or out-group language. The reason being that concealed impulses, as they are not self-conscious, cannot generate the formation of an in-group and out-group, except as between the subject and object. All objects become othered in this scenario. Thus, it is necessary to supplement negation to some degree to construct structures upon negation, or upon the concealed impulses of the spatial non-consensual actor. How does this occur? Namely, through coupling with an archetypal consensual actor. Through the act of sublimation by that archetypal consensual actor of displacement of the spatial non-consensual actor into the symbolic and archetypal plates. Thus, we can see that through partnering of a spatial non-consensual and an archetypal consensual line, it is possible to produce a structure, which is built primarily on negation, upon the spatial non-consensual state, with supplementary affirmation through the sublimation of the archetypal consensual actor. Now, it can also be said that lateral action, that is, bringing an individual who is archetypal consensual into a nonlinear state, requires both reciprocation and displacement within nonlinearity. In other words, although reciprocation produces epigenetic convergence, which generates genetic synchronicity. It requires some element of displacement of social actor within nonlinearity to eliminate the spatial non-consensual state and replace it with an archetypal consensual state. Which is to say, only an archetypal individual need be forced into nonlinearity, which is done by generating a cortisol burst further to expression of impulses and reciprocation nonlinearly. In other words, some cortisol produced by deference is required to generate the reciprocation necessary for producing epigenetic convergence. That's the end of the podcast for today.